The M17 claims to be able to play up to N64 and PSP games, all for just £35. The M17 is one of those super budget handhelds that we see on AliExpress all the time. Aside from the big names like Anbernic, Retro, Powkiddy and Miyu, loads of retro handhelds seem to be coming out the woodworks and appearing on AliExpress. In the past, you used to be able to guarantee that every single one of those was absolutely trash, but these days, they can be quite surprising. A few weeks ago, I was looking around seeing if there was anything interesting, and I came across 3 super budget and really interesting handhelds. And the first one we'll be looking at is the M17. Now, the M17 is a £35 clone of the Retroid Pocket 3 Plus that claims to be able to play up to N64 and PSP gaming. But for £35 from AliExpress, I think you can probably guess it's not going to do everything as well as it claims. But that doesn't mean it's not great value and a really interesting console. As you would expect for something for £35 that claims to do so much, there's going to be some negatives. So let's get those out of the way straight away. First off, instantly you can tell it's made from some cheaper plastic than some of the other more premium retro handhelds. On top of that, it has one of those plasticky screens that has a bit of glare to it that makes it a bit more reflective in the sun than you would like. Despite appearing to have all the buttons you need, it doesn't have R3 and L3 clickability, and it doesn't have a sleep mode either. You can only switch on the console or switch it off. It boasts only a mono speaker as opposed to stereo, and although it comes with a really good user interface and loads of games, some of the games have some weird names in the menu, even though they are the proper games. I don't know if that's a translation issue or if they're trying to get around ROM emulation somehow. But the user interface is the same kind of user interface you come to expect on Linux handhelds from Anbernic, so you can see pictures of either the cover of the game or a screenshot of the game as well, so it's not really difficult. It was just a bit of a weird thing. And finally, as you can probably guess, N64 and PSP emulation, although technically it can do it, it's not great. But like we said, this is a £35 console, and in reality, it's not competing with N64 and PSP emulation handhelds. At £35, it's competing mostly with retro handhelds, budget ones, that play up to SNES emulation, and also potentially PlayStation 1 emulation as well if you consider the RG35XX. And when you look at the M17 through that perspective, it's actually pretty decent. Now, in terms of its place in the market, as we said, for £35, it's slightly more expensive than something like a Datafrog SF2000, which can only play up to SNES emulation, and it's slightly cheaper than an RG35XX, which will give you PlayStation 1 emulation. The £35 price mark is a great price point and definitely keeps it in that budget range. In terms of the look, you can see instantly that the M17 is basically a copy of the Retroid Pocket 3 Plus. I like to think of it as the Retroid Pocket 3 Minus or the RP3 Minus. Because from a distance, it does look like a Retroid Pocket 3 Plus, but as soon as you get it in your hands, you can instantly feel it's just not that same level of quality. It does come with a USB-C port, a headphone socket, and an SD card slot, which is pretty much all you're going to need from a budget retro handheld. Practicality-wise and pocketability, that's where it's identical to the Retroid Pocket 3 Plus, because in terms of size and shape, it is pretty much identical, meaning it slides in your pocket in exactly the same way and has the same kind of awkward bumps that Retroid Pocket 3 Plus has thanks to the shoulder buttons. The strange thing about the M17 that you don't see on many retro gaming handhelds these days is that the on-off button is literally a switch. It's not a button, which means it's either on or it's off. Like we said, it doesn't have the functionality of sleep, which I just felt like was frustrating because it's good to have a sleep mode, but I also felt using a switch like that just also adds to the feeling of this not being a high quality handheld. Now don't get me wrong, it doesn't feel terrible, and for £35 it feels pretty decent. We are comparing this to handhelds that cost 3 times the price, so of course the materials they use, the plastics are gonna feel better, and if having to use a switch instead of a button for the on-off manages to knock off £10 off the price, then in that case it's worth it. I know from speaking to a lot of people in the community and a lot of friends, a lot of people are on the fence of diving into retro gaming handhelds. People who've never used them before don't really know what to expect and don't know how awesome they can be. So for a device to cost £35 can make it a bit easier for somebody to jump into the world of retro gaming. And the M17 is honestly a great choice for that, because despite all the issues it has, it ticks all the boxes I believe are necessary for a budget handheld. The user interface is the same kind of emulate user interface we see on Linux handhelds from Anbernic, which I find incredibly user-friendly and so easy to just jump in. You've basically just got a menu of consoles, you jump in and select the game that you want, and most of them have good artwork so you can see the cover of the game or a screenshot as well. For people jumping into retro gaming handhelds, for newcomers, this is a fantastic type of user interface. And for me, it's one of the most important things about a budget retro handheld, because some of the cheaper options have some pretty poor user interfaces. The M17 also comes absolutely jam-packed with video games, giving you thousands of games from the 8-bit and 16-bit generation, and also giving you you absolutely loads of games for PlayStation 1, N64 and PSP. And the fact that we've got an SD card slot as well makes it very easy for you to be able to add and change the ROMs that are on your device. Now, as we said before, N64 and PSP emulation isn't great on this device. There are definitely going to be some games you can play on those consoles which play pretty smoothly, but for the most part, the games I chose and games you want to experience on an N64 and PSP, the more 3D games, were very choppy and were quite difficult to enjoy. PlayStation 1 emulation, however, was brilliant and really enjoyable on a device like the M17. All the PlayStation 1 games I played ran really well and honestly really surprised me for a £35 console. And when you are engrossed in a PlayStation 1 game and using the M17, none of the issues, none of the quirks we mentioned affect the gameplay at all. It remains a thoroughly enjoyable gameplay experience. The one issue that does remain is the slight reflectiveness of the screen, and this is something I really wish they had changed. Having a slightly different plastic over the screen would have made for a totally different experience in how the screen looks, but that only really presents itself in quite a sunny or bright environment. Now, having an emulate user interface, as we said, is absolutely brilliant for a budget handheld. It makes it really easy for somebody to get into and experience what a retro gaming handheld is like for a very decent price. But the version of emulate that they have chosen to put on the M17 is one that is quite stripped down in terms of the features and options that you've got. So I struggled to find options to change the aspect ratio of the games that were being played, which would have been ideal considering this console excels at games that run at 4:3 ratio, yet the screen is more of a 16:9 aspect. As we said, because it copies a Retroid Pocket 3 Plus, it looks a bit more like a PSP. And yes, it can play PSP games, but you're not really going to be playing PSP games on this. You're going to be playing PlayStation 1 games and SNES games and Mega Drive games, and they need a 4:3 aspect ratio. Now, the screen actually does a great job. It doesn't really look stretched. I personally never once had an issue playing any of the games like I do with some other handhelds that force an aspect ratio on you, but I think having the option would have been nice. But honestly, I'm really impressed with the M17, and for £35, I actually think it's a great handheld, and a handheld I'd recommend to anybody that wants to get a taste of retro gaming is like, but doesn't want to blow a lot of money just yet. It gives you a good idea for what these consoles are like to play and feel in your hand, the shape and size of them. It gives you access to so many games over the generations, including the PlayStation 1 library, and even enables you to dabble in a few N64 and PSP games. Cheap budget handhelds on AliExpress now are really starting to up their game, and are genuinely starting to become a decent option for newcomers to the scene, and I think the M17 is a perfect example of that. If you want to get yourself an M17, links will be in the description below. But if you want to check out some of the crazy, quirky, and outright weird budget options from AliExpress, check out this video right here.